One of the most common criticisms I see from other gamers and critics is not liking it when a different IP takes inspiration from or, well, copies the gameplay style from some well-known games. The idea being they don't want it to feel like they played it before. For someone like me, games that take that kind of inspiration are actually a treat. It's gonna sound like crazy talk, but I'm among the 10 people who doesn't have a Switch and didn't grow up with Nintendo past the SNES. So for me, the Metroivania genre is a gold mine of fun. The base gameplay may be similar across the board, but getting to see how each developer gives it their own spin is part of the fun, and Minoria is no different. I don't even remember how I got this game, but once I saw it was a Metroivania and it was also a third entry for a studio that has made Metroivanias before, I got curious and excited. Minoria puts you under the habit of Sister Semilla, a nun working under the sacred office of the Kingdom's Church, a pseudo-medieval Christian organization that trains nuns as missionaries to fight against witches, people who refuse to follow the teachings of the religion and punishing them by death. We get into the story as the witches have unleashed a powerful attack against the kingdom. Both princesses have been taken hostage in the castle, and it's up to Sister Semilla and her trusty squire Sister Anna Fran to find them and put an end to the witch thread. Especially since they are the last survivors of their unit, because the witches wiped them all out. What follows is an adventure full of hardships. Since this game is a Metroivania, then it is one that is leaning harder into the Castlevania side of things, and I love it. I'm gonna cut to the chase and tell you right away, this is a bit of a hard game. Even early enemies can kill an unprepared player, and the more you advance through the story, the challenges get a lot tougher. So how do we survive and achieve victory? We do this by parrying. Think of it as not too different from the parrying in most hack and slash games. Time your parrying animation at the right second, and Sister Semilla will counterattack with a nice barrage of strikes that will likely one-shot your opponents. This is fantastic for crowd control, or for whenever you want to get yourself out of a sticky situation. For everything else, the very basic combo of slashing at enemies until they die is also very viable. I would have loved it if this was treated no different from its contemporaries, like say Hollow Knight, where there is virtually no real leveling system or ways to strengthen your weapon that are not dictated by the plot, but rather by your own skill. But that is not the case in Minoria, as we do have an XP system. Leveling up in this game is rather simple. Every new level you gain gives you a little bit of an HP and an increase in damage. It is very marginal unless you spend time grinding, and at the same time it doesn't make too much of a difference to level up a lot, because no matter how strong you get, enemies can and will hit you like a truck if you are not careful. So how do you get around healing or assisting yourself? There is magic, of course, in the form of incense. As you explore the castle and the cathedral, you come across incenses that you can either buy from vendors from the coins you collect, or by finding them in the game world by exploring. They have a variety of effects, from defending yourself, to dealing damage with enemies, to even having passive abilities to help you in your journey, with the only real catch that they have a limited number of uses, and that includes your healing. And the only way to recharge them is by saving the game at any save point. Now, you may be probably thinking, this is like Dark Souls, right? Not really. Picking up from its contemporaries, clearing rooms in this game makes exploring easier, but true to the classic Metroivania formula, don't count on emptying the castle, as enemies will always respawn every time you enter a room once again. That means the main idea in general is to defeat or avoid enemies and just keep exploring. The main objective, of course, being following the story and taking down the witches and the monsters they control. In true Metroivania fashion, the best way to truly see progress is whenever you stumble upon a power-up or find the next save point. So there is a degree of thrill in having made a considerable progress in your exploration or in the story itself, and having to be extra careful so you don't die and lose all that progress on your way to save the game. In a way, I like this, because it teaches you to play carefully and to truly stop for a moment and get a hang on the combat mechanics, while also keeping an eye on your instances to their max efficiency. The progress you make with new skills and powers is also the ability to backtrack and get to areas you couldn't get to before. I know for some this kind of aspect is a turn off. After all, the idea in video games is to make progress, not to be constantly backtracking from one place to another. But trust me, This style of gameplay is popular in the indie scene, and you even see some of it in AAA and survival horror games for a reason: depth. You are stuck in a very hostile and complex place. You are facing great odds, and the idea is less about making it from point A to point B and more about navigating your way around and defeating the main creatures controlling the area. All of it to culminate in taking down their leaders, and of course, liberate the place for good. And in a game like Minoria, this fits the plot perfectly. The storytelling here is very minimal, of course. This is an indie game after all. But between the story and the aesthetic of the game, I like how it leans more into the Castlevania side of things, with both the theme of religion, witches, and other gothic horrors. Because if the gameplay you've seen so far hasn't made it clear, the story in Minoria is not a happy one. The castle and the adjacent areas are littered with corpses and skeletons. Anyone who could be a potential ally is either dead or already turned to the witch's side. And even though Sister Semilla and Sister Anne are supposed to be the good guys, there are implications the world was already in a really bad state, being essentially ruled by a holy inquisition, where the sacred office enforces their teaching with an iron fist, and delivering death to anyone daring to do so much as to question them. Now, this doesn't mean this game has a complex choice system. A lot of the dialogue choices are very surface level and are more flavored text to give the very silent Sister Semilla some character to reflect how the player may feel about what's happening around you. That's not to say there is no merit to it. One of the things I really appreciate in a game like this is when they simply present you with the context and the relevant questions about the story and the world, and then they let you draw your own conclusions as you make an informed choice about which ending you wish to get. I really wish I could only tell you good things about this game, and while I am very willing to be lenient towards indie games due to having a much humbler depth team behind them, I do have to point out a few minor flaws that rubbed me the wrong way, or at the very least felt odd to me. As I said earlier, the XP systems exist only to make you a little bit stronger each time, with some segments in the game allowing you to grind. It feels like the game is just padding for length, really. While in theory you can somewhat brute force your way through the game with just the right amount of XP, the reality is that you do need to level up if you wish to deal decent damage and have a fighting chance. Plus, the HP bonus you get from leveling up is what keeps enemies from downright one-shotting you. Basically, I don't like it when games get grindy. I feel there is a better way to pace things out, or if they really wanted to make a progression system, then let the weapons hit harder, or let the new weapons act like the upgrades, but alas, it is what it is. Although there is a New Game Plus option that makes enemies more challenging, but at the same time you hit them just as hard, and I really ended up loving that for my second playthrough, I feel like more nuances could have helped the game. Because you see, one of the few secrets this game has is that bosses drop unique weapons if you defeat them without taking damage. On paper, that sounds like an awesome challenge, but in execution, some bosses range from random unpredictable patterns to straight up difficulty spikes, so pulling that off in a first playthrough is out of the question. And while I did stop dying to bosses once I got a hang of the combat, fighting them is a little too chaotic for doing a no damage run. I mean, it is doable, but it feels more like an inconvenience rather than a fun challenge. That's why I spend most of my boss fights tanking damage against them. Either way, even with those minor hiccups, I think Minoria is a surprisingly awesome game. It scratched all the right itches for a great Metroivania game, and the gothic horror set in a fantasy castle hit the right spots for me. Now, would I recommend this one? I'll say yeah. This may not be the most complex Metroivania out there, but the combat, weapon, and variety and the story were very good enough to keep me hooked and to play to get both endings and all the achievements even. I do hear this is not the only Metroivania from this developer, of course. They have another one supposedly set in the same universe with a sequel on the way, so I will certainly keep an eye out for those. Because while the Metroivania genre is a goldmine of variety in settings, stories, and gameplay systems, sometimes it's best to go back to the basics, enjoy some darkness, and fight hard to survive.